Ethics critic Charlie Angus. Mr. Angus, you have been very strong on the WE scandal, really looking for the government to provide some answers, to show up at committee. Is this a direct result? Is the resignation of Bill Morneau a direct result of the WE charity scandal, in your opinion?
It's absolutely clear that the Prime Minister needed to switch the channel. They knew that there were going to be two reports coming down that were going to be both very devastating. It's pretty clear that the Ethics Commissioner is going to find the Prime Minister guilty. He's also going to find Bill Morneau guilty. And this is really damaging because it speaks to the broader problem. We're in the biggest economic and medical crisis in a century. And the Prime Minister had done, I think, a very good job of reassuring Canadians. He had all of us working together. And then they got sidetracked with the Kielburger brothers. This billion-dollar scheme went off the rails really quickly. And then we found out that the Prime Minister's family was being hired to the tune of $500,000, that Bill Morneau was flying around the world and forgot that he was getting these gifts. This has really damaged the Prime Minister. They're trying to find a way to put a Band-Aid on it, so they're using the dog days of August. But the fact that a finance minister in the biggest economic crisis in the century has to walk the plank, wow, we're really we're in uncharted territory here.
Is that enough, though? Is Bill Morneau's conflict of interest issues equitable with the conflict of interest issues that Trudeau is accused of? Because one would argue that if the finance minister has to leave because of that, and solely because of that, then doesn't that open up the door for the opposition, for yourself, for the Conservatives to say, well, Morneau has set a precedent. If he's gone, the Prime Minister should go as well.
Well, I think the Prime Minister's making a desperate calculation here. He's figuring, I will throw my finance minister in the midst of an unprecedented economic crisis to the wolves, and the international markets be damned. But I'm hoping that that will get me past this. But clearly, if you look at the very first Trudeau report, that the Aga Khan scandal, you look at the Jody Wilson-Raybould scandal that he was found guilty in the second. The Prime Minister's really up to his neck in this. This was about bad judgment. They didn't need to come up with this scheme for this volunteer youth thing. It had nothing to do with the layout of what was being done in the pandemic. It really threw a lot of the work off. I know many Liberals are as shocked as we are in the opposition. The Prime Minister went down. So it's about the Prime Minister's judgment. It's about the people he surrounds himself with. So he is certainly hoping that by throwing Bill Morneau overboard, it'll get passed. But, when you look at how much the Prime Minister's family was tied in financially, and you look at the rules and the conflict of interest, how does the Prime Minister figure that in the fall this isn't going to continue to hammer away at him?
But, Mr. Angus, there's no real fallout, except political fallout, per se, to being found guilty of an ethics violation, as we've seen the last two times the Prime Minister had to face that. In some cases, there's a minor financial penalty, but there's no true recourse. There's no rule that says he has to step down. It is left to the voters to decide.
Well, I think that that's part of the problem with our ethics code, or the Ethics Act, is it's supposed shame should be enough, but I would think the Prime Minister would realize the last time he was found guilty, he lost two of his strongest women cabinet ministers. It destroyed his reputation as the feminist Prime Minister. He lost the clerk of the Privy Council. I certainly would have thought that they would have had measures in place to keep something like this from happening again. And the fact that the Prime Minister was so closely tied with the Kielburgers, when this WE scandal charity idea came up, you would have thought there would have been people who would have asked questions. And of course, we didn't know at that time that following the Prime Minister being elected, that they had hired his family members to the tune of $500,000. That's really a serious conflict that the Prime Minister can't claim he wasn't aware of. He's involved in this, and it's going to damage his ability to walk us through. And I want to put this in perspective. I'm opposition, but we've got to get through this fall. This fall is going to be I think, an unprecedented crisis for us in terms of economics, health. This is a time when the Prime Minister needs to make Canadians believes that he's got their back. And with Bill Morneau going, people are going to be thinking twice.
Right. Mr. Angus, I just do want to clarify something with you, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but if I'm not mistaken, the conflict extends only to your immediate family. So as much as Trudeau's mother and brother were indeed paid by We Charity, would that breach the conflict of interest rules?
Well, that's a really good question, because that's what Justin Trudeau hung his whole hat on in his testimony in committee. But Justin Trudeau is only looking at Section 2 of the Act, and Section 3 of the Act defines family as your relatives, your relations. So he was really clear, and this is a really important thing. He kept saying the family is only spouse and children, but it also says that relatives and hiring of relatives is a key issue here, and that's. Okay. I think the Prime Minister just needed to do better on this, and he failed us. This was a bizarre scheme that he got involved in, and it's cost him his finance minister.
I appreciate you clarifying that, because, again, I was reading through the conflict of interest and looking at that, and that has been the spin. So I appreciate you, making that clear for myself and for Canadians. Good to talk to you, Mr. Angus, as always.
Thank you so much.
Okay, NDP MP Charlie Angus.